My mother never hit me or screamed at me. She just invested a decade into my brother and forgot I existed. Then one night, she admitted she wished life had been simpler without me. I stayed quiet. I waited. And I let the truth expose itself in a way she couldn't undo. I've never written this down before because saying it out loud makes it feel real in a way I wasn't ready for. I grew up believing there was something slightly wrong with me, not enough to be obvious, just enough to matter. My mother never said she didn't love me. She didn't have to. Love in our house was measured by time, attention, and effort, and almost all of it went to my older brother. He was the project. I was the background noise. I learned early how to take up less space, how to be helpful without being noticed, how to tell myself that needing less meant being stronger. From the outside, our family looked normal. No shouting, no chaos, no clear villain. That's what makes this harder to explain. Neglect doesn't always leave marks. Sometimes it just reshapes how you see yourself. My brother's achievements were celebrated like milestones. Mine were acknowledged like footnotes. I told myself this was just how families worked, that someone always shines brighter. I convinced myself I didn't mind. The moment that changed everything didn't come with drama. It was late, quiet, ordinary. My mother was tired and distracted, and I was helping because that's what I did to feel useful. She said she sometimes wished things had been simpler, that she wished I had turned out differently. She didn't look at me when she said it. She didn't realize she had said it at all. I nodded, kept my hands busy, and stored the sentence somewhere deep. That was the night I stopped trying to earn something I was never meant to have. My brother didn't do anything wrong, and that was part of the problem. He wasn't cruel or arrogant. He was just easy to love. He fit neatly into the version of life my mother had imagined for herself long before either of us understood what expectations were. He played the right sports, said the right things, brought home the kind of achievements that could be framed and shown to guests. Our house slowly filled with proof of his progress. Trophies gathered dust on shelves, certificates slid into plastic covers, photographs multiplied in albums that always stayed within reach. I existed in the same space but not the same story. When I did well, it was treated as a surprise. When I struggled, it was treated as confirmation. No one said this out loud, but you feel these things as a child. You learn to read pauses, glances, the way conversations shift. I started managing expectations before anyone asked me to. I chose paths that wouldn't disappoint, hobbies that didn't require investment, goals that stayed small enough to ignore. Family gatherings followed the same pattern. People asked my brother about his plans, his future, his potential. I answered questions about school with short, forgettable replies. My mother listened closely to him and half listened to me. Sometimes she would nod without realizing she hadn't heard a word. I don't think she meant to hurt me. I think she genuinely believed she was being fair. That's what made it sink in slowly, quietly, over years. I wasn't competing with my brother. I was growing up beside him, watching him become someone worth building around, while I learned how to disappear without anyone asking where I went. The night she said it is burned into my memory, not because of anger, but because of how ordinary it felt. I was helping her sort papers in the study, stacking folders and filing receipts, just as I had done 1,000 times before. She was tired, and the kind of honesty that slips out when people are too exhausted to filter themselves found its way into her words. She paused over a folder of my brother's achievements, smiling faintly, then glanced at me without really looking. That's when she said she sometimes wondered what life would be like if I had turned out more like him. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added that she wished things had been simpler. I froze, but not in shock. I'd known somewhere deep down that this was the truth. I nodded, kept sorting the papers, and folded the sentence into the corners of my mind, where it stayed untouched for years. There was no yelling, no tears, no moment of confrontation. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, like a weight being placed on my chest, small but persistent. In that instant, the years of feeling secondary became a tangible thing I could hold. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't try to explain myself. Instead, I stepped back in silence and let the realization settle. That night marked the end of my attempts to seek approval or affection that would never come. Somewhere in that quiet moment, a small, deliberate thought began to take root. If I couldn't earn recognition, maybe I could find a way to make the truth matter without needing her permission. Revenge didn't look like I expected it to. I didn't want to yell or embarrass anyone. I didn't want to confront my mother or make my brother feel guilty. What I wanted was something quieter, something that left no room for denial. I began keeping track of everything, not in anger but in careful observation. Dates, small incidents, patterns of attention and neglect. I wrote down what got celebrated and what was ignored, who was praised and who was left to fade into the background. I didn't editorialize or exaggerate. I just recorded. It became almost a ritual. I would sit at my desk late at night, sifting through memories, emails, and old calendars. Each entry was a quiet confirmation that my instincts had been right all along. My brother's successes were framed as evidence of promise, while mine were treated as anomalies or setbacks. Seeing it all laid out like that was almost comforting. It was proof that the imbalance wasn't my fault. I started to notice more too, tiny patterns in my mother's behavior I hadn't seen before. How she would ask him questions in detail but never remember mine. How she would offer to help him with projects but assume I could manage on my own. How her attention always had a hierarchy. Writing it down didn't fix anything, but it made the invisible visible. I began to understand that revenge didn't have to be loud or destructive. Sometimes it was simply letting the truth exist. It was subtle, almost clinical, but it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been neglected for years. And for the first time I felt a quiet sense of control. Years passed, and the quiet record I'd been keeping grew into something more concrete than I ever imagined. My mother decided to create a family history for a local community project, inviting everyone to contribute memories, photos, and documents. It was the kind of thing that seemed harmless at first, a sentimental project meant to showcase the family's achievements. For the first time, I had an opportunity to let my careful documentation intersect with something public. I submitted my records exactly as they were. I didn't embellish. I didn't frame it as a complaint or a critique. I just laid out the facts. Who received attention, who was left out, what moments were celebrated, and which were quietly ignored. I told myself this wasn't revenge. It was participation, an honest reflection of how things had unfolded over the years. I included dates, milestones, and the small, everyday moments that showed the patterns clearly. Sending it off was harder than I expected. My hands shook as I attached the files and pressed send. Part of me feared judgment, rejection, or confrontation. Another part of me felt a strange sense of inevitability, like this had been waiting to happen all along. My submission would sit next to glowing accounts of my brother's achievements, his trophies and accolades carefully curated by my mother. The contrast was unavoidable, even if I had not intended it as a statement. I realized in that moment that revenge didn't need to be dramatic to be effective. It didn't require yelling, scheming, or confrontation. Sometimes simply letting the truth exist, documented and undeniable, could shift perceptions in ways that silence never could. And in that quiet act, I felt a mix of fear, anticipation, and something I couldn't yet name. The consequences of my submission didn't appear overnight. There was no confrontation, no outburst, no immediate acknowledgement. Instead, everything shifted slowly, almost imperceptibly, in the spaces between words and gestures. My mother grew quieter, more deliberate in how she interacted with me. She asked for clarifications on dates and events in my documents, always through neutral emails or casual questions, but I could sense a careful recalibration beneath the surface. She was reading what I had written, absorbing it, and it unsettled her in a way that nothing else had. My brother noticed the change before I did. He seemed unsure how to act around me, almost cautious. Our family gatherings, once comfortably predictable, began to feel fragile. People paused before praising him, as if aware that the record of my life existed alongside his. The balance that had always favored him now had subtle cracks. I watched the shifts, the hesitant glances, the questions that lingered just a little too long. It was surreal the way a quiet act could ripple outward, unseen but undeniable. I started to realize that revenge didn't have to be explosive to be real. It could be subtle, like a small weight shifting a foundation you didn't know was fragile. And yet, even as I observed the effects, I felt no triumph, no joy. There was a strange mixture of relief and apprehension, a sense that the truth had finally found a place outside my own mind. It didn't fix anything, and it didn't give me the validation I had unconsciously hoped for, but it changed the air in our home, and sometimes, change is enough to leave a mark. I hadn't expected my brother to notice, let alone be affected, but he was. He didn't confront me and he didn't seem angry. He just looked different, as if a part of the comfortable story he had always believed about our family had cracked. I noticed him sharing things he never had before, small confessions about struggles he'd hidden, insecurities he'd never voiced. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it made our interactions heavier, more real. The image of perfection he had carried for so long was now complicated by the truth I had quietly introduced. Watching him process it was strange. He wasn't resentful. He was cautious, almost searching, as if trying to understand a version of our childhood he had ignored. There were moments when I felt a flicker of connection, the kind that only comes from mutual recognition of shared pain, but it was fleeting. I realized that my act of documentation, the thing I had thought of as purely my own, was now reshaping him too. That wasn't something I had anticipated. I hadn't intended for anyone else to be affected, yet the truth has a way of finding its audience. For the first time, I felt a complicated mix of satisfaction and unease. I had done what I set out to do. The imbalance, the neglect, the quiet erasure of my existence was finally visible. But seeing its impact on my brother reminded me that actions, even subtle ones, have consequences beyond ourselves. Revenge, I understood, wasn't a single moment or gesture. It was a ripple that could touch everything around you, sometimes in ways you couldn't fully control. My mother never apologized, and I don't think she ever fully acknowledged what she had done. She didn't need to. Her behavior had shifted in quiet ways that spoke louder than words. She began to notice me more deliberately, asking my opinion on small decisions, forwarding opportunities one might have missed before, and remembering dates that had previously slipped her mind. It wasn't dramatic and it wasn't praise, but it was an acknowledgement that my presence mattered in a way it hadn't for years. I didn't feel the relief I thought I would. Instead, I felt a strange tension. Satisfaction mixed with an unshakable emptiness. I had imagined that this subtle recalibration would give me closure, a sense of balance restored. It didn't. There was no emotional vindication, no moment of triumph, only the quiet understanding that things had shifted in ways that could never be fully reversed. My mother's recognition was partial, cautious, and mediated by her own discomfort, not by genuine acknowledgement of the past. And yet, it was enough to confirm that my careful record had mattered. The truth existed outside my head, undeniable and visible, and that was its own kind of power. In some ways, the effect on my brother continued as well. He reached out more, shared parts of his life he had never mentioned, and hesitated less in conversations where he might have once dominated. I began to see him as a person, complicated and fragile, rather than a perfect figure I had resented. The act that had started as quiet revenge became something broader, a subtle shift in family dynamics that no one could fully articulate. It left me with no celebration, no triumph, only the understanding that honesty, once set in motion, quietly reshapes everything around it. I've spent years thinking about what I had done and whether it made me a better person. The truth is, I don't know if it did. I didn't feel victorious and I didn't feel healed. Putting the record out into the world, letting my experiences exist alongside my brother's celebrated life, didn't erase the years of quiet neglect. It didn't make my mother suddenly see me the way she might have if she'd loved me equally from the start. And yet, it changed something, even if subtly, even if incompletely. I began to understand that revenge doesn't need fireworks to exist. It doesn't need confrontation or screaming. Sometimes simply revealing the truth, letting it exist outside your own mind, is enough to shift perception, to tilt the balance in a way that can't be ignored. But the ripple it creates doesn't stop with the person who caused the pain. My brother had been affected in ways I hadn't anticipated. He became more cautious, more self-aware, more willing to acknowledge the quiet inequities of our past. That wasn't something I had planned or even wanted at first, but I realized that truth, once released, moves through everyone it touches. And for me, the consequences were internal. I had expected closure, but closure never came. I had expected relief, but instead there was an ongoing weight, a recognition that even honesty doesn't fully repair what's been broken. I could see my mother, my brother, and myself differently now, and that awareness carried its own quiet burden. Revenge had given me clarity, but it hadn't given me peace. It left me in the same family, in the same house, but with a sharper understanding of the lines that had always separated us, lines that would never fully disappear. Years later, the family story exists in the archives, carefully preserved, a record of both what was celebrated and what was quietly ignored. People can read it and draw their own conclusions. My mother continues her life with that record quietly in the background, aware of its existence, even if she never confronts it directly. My brother carries a more complicated understanding of our childhood, one that blends admiration, guilt, and curiosity. And I carry the knowledge that being seen doesn't automatically heal you. I don't celebrate what happened. I don't feel triumphant or vindicated. I also don't regret it. The act of writing down the truth, of letting it exist outside my mind, has changed the way I see myself and everyone around me. It has reshaped the unspoken dynamics of our family without offering clear answers or neat resolutions. There is no dramatic reconciliation, no grand apology, no moment where everything feels balanced. Life continues quietly altered, and I've had to learn to live with that. Some nights I reflect on what I wanted when I first started recording everything. I thought I wanted recognition, acknowledgement, maybe even a reversal of how things had been. Instead, I discovered something less tangible but more lasting. Awareness. The truth exists undeniable, for anyone who chooses to see it. And sometimes that is enough to shift the course of relationships, even if it doesn't erase the past. I'm left with a quiet understanding that love, once uneven, never fully balances itself. It only becomes honest, complicated, and real. And maybe that is all it can ever be.